A very warm welcome to the program. I am Folashade Ogrinde. It doesn't take a sorcerer to decode that Nigeria is heading towards an end to its decades-long subsidy regime. From the various statements by the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timi Persiva, and the Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Mele Kyari, an end to all subsidy regime, both in the petroleum and power sectors, is imminent. According to these officials, it doesn't make economic sense for the government to keep spending 102.5 billion naira monthly to reduce the retail cost of petrol, adding that the price of petrol should be more than 280 naira per litre. Now take a listen to Mele Kyari and Timi Persiva's statement on the issue.
We're importing at market price, and we're selling at 162 naira per litre today. Looking at the current market situation, the actual price could have been anywhere between 211 that you have mentioned and around 234 naira to the litre. The meaning of this is that consumers are not paying for the full value of the PMS that we are consuming, and therefore somebody is bearing that cost. As we speak today, the difference is being carried in the books of NNPC, and I can confirm to you that NNPC may no longer be in position to carry that burden because we cannot continue to carry it on our books.
We all know that there is no provision in the budget for subsidy. And so, somewhere down the line, I believe that the NNPC cannot continue to take this blow. There is no way, because there is no provision for it. So as a country, let us take the benefits of the higher crude oil prices, and I hope that we'll also be ready to take a little pain on the other side.
Now, to dissect to what extent all of this would affect businesses and individuals, I'm joined now by the senior economist at Streetnomics Limited, Mr. Gospel Obele. Glad to have you again on the program. I'll begin by asking, does government's argument of a loss as a result of subsidy hold water, especially if you consider inflation rates and weakening naira?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's actually Streetnomics Limited. To answer the question, we actually saw this coming. The question was not if, the question was when. Holding into constant every other economic variables that have failed in the Nigerian economy. So, yes, it has finally come. The question will now be, when will these prices be reflected in the neighborhood filling stations and all that? And that's probably when Nigerians will get to understand the intricacies of what we're dealing with as a country and as a people. So it's quite unfortunate that we're here where we are here today. And like I've always said several times, that anything that happens to the Nigerian economy, first of all, it's been pushed as a burden to the consumers. That's one. And secondly, it gets to affect the way the Nigerian economy is currently structured. There are no shock absorbers or buffers, all right, to take those shocks. So they get to hit the consumer's pocket, the value of the currency, and literally, all right, overturn everything to an increased state of cost of living, or an increased cost of living.
Now, the bigger picture some have argued is that with time, market forces will come to play and price will go down. Do you see this happening anytime soon?
I've always argued that the idea of market forces is very relative. The reason why market forces is relative is that market forces as an argument would only be valid when demand and supply side dynamics are informed. All right. So now the demand side here is that Nigerians depend on PMS for virtually everything. All right. And that's because we have a poor power situation. All right. You need fuel to work. You also need fuel to run the house, household consumption and all that. So you have that. That's the demand side. Now, the supply side is such that we cannot even produce our own fuel. We cannot refine our own fuel. All right. So we have to depend on importation to have a significant amount that can meet demand. And still yet, all right, there are still issues around meeting demand and all of that. So if you leave it to market forces, which apparently the NNPC do not have an option than to, all right, it shows that demand will always still override supply, all right, because supply is threatened at the base level, at the structural level. So meaning that prices are most likely still going to keep going up. Remember the conversation of the dollar. of the naira, all right, when CBN proposed, when economists had talked about the need to, all right, allow the naira to regulate, all right, and when CBN took that action, we could see that, you know, things really went haywire in the sense, all right, not because it was not the right action to take, but for market forces to make sense, there must be a, you know, substantial amount of supply end, all right, trying to meet the demand side, so that by the time those forces stretch themselves, it finds an equilibrium point. But right now, equilibrium is almost out of the question because demand side way outweighs the supply side, which will always lead to increased prices. It's just a simple law of economics.
Now, you talked about the demand and supply side. Are we seeing a situation whereby, just as we had during the time of the telecom sector, where we had you know, the forces of demand and supply come into play, are you seeing that situation happen in Nigeria, especially when the price of petrol goes for as much as 280 naira per litre?
Yes, most likely, because then again, when you leave things to the market forces, you know, there are many variables that get to shape the outcome. All right. And that demand side in itself will get to stretch how those variables play out. And then you get to see the result in increased prices over a period of time. After a while, the whole situation may stabilize. But then again, you may not be able to take out the fact that it may have caused a lot of severe structural damages to the Nigerian economy. And don't forget, we're trying to get out of recession. All right. Early in January, I mentioned somewhere that, all right, the Nigerian economy in 2021 is going to experience a slow but cautioned recovery. So recovery is already slow, but we need to caution ourselves, because by the time we get into this whole demand supply or saga or narrative, we realize that the potential or the possibility of sliding back into recession is actually higher, all right, over a period of time in a sense. But we'll get to see some form of stability as we go. But then again, the economy will get to suffer for it to a large extent.
Now, if subsidy is eventually removed, petrol and diesel will sell for as much as 280 naira per litre, and the electricity tariff will certainly not be left out. Would that not cause hyperinflation and create more economic hardship for the people?
Of course, it will create more economic hardship. Very, very, I mean, it's really a very clear math in a sense, because transportation is dependent on availability of fuel. Running the house is dependent on availability of fuel. Even running your businesses, all right, is dependent on the availability of fuel. Even those who don't make profit, high profit margins, and whose income are primarily on a daily basis, all right, it gets to shrink the amount of money they can make on a daily basis, all right. So it's definitely going to impact on every economic agent, all right, from SMEs to households and to other firms and large corporates in that order. So and what's likely going to happen is that businesses are most likely going to push down the cost on the final consumer, who is already burdened by increased tariffs and all of that. So yes, we'll get a situation where inflation will skyrocket further down, and that's because logistics and mobilities around food items and all of these things are going to be affected by the increased prices in fuel.
Now let's talk about solutions. In what ways do you think businesses and sectors of the economy can survive?
Well, to be very honest, in this regard, it's primarily a situation that is out of the circle of control or circle of influence, if you want to use that term in the sense. And that's because this is a structural macroeconomic issue. You know, in marketing, you talk about the macroeconomics, the microeconomics, the external environment and internal environment. So it's going to be a major threat to businesses. And threats are situations that businesses themselves don't have a control or influence over. All right. So the only situation or the only strategy or way we can help SMEs curtail the impact and still get to do some good business and thrive is if the government steps into the picture itself to moderate and to build the structural mechanisms to hold these shock absorbers. That's the only way out of this space. Otherwise, businesses will have to shift the cost to the final consumer, meaning that a bottle of XYZ product that cost 15 naira before will likely cost 100 naira or a 150 naira because cost of transportation increased, cost of fuel has increased, and cost of doing business generally has increased. So for businesses to thrive, they may have to push the cost to the final consumer, but that's not the best of options we should have on the table in the ideal sense.
Well, thank you so much, Gospel Obele, Senior Economist at Streetnomics Limited, for your contribution. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll take a break here, but when we return, we'll focus on how diesel-reliant economy like Nigeria can survive a hike in diesel price. Stay with us.
Corruption not in my country.
Hello? Yeah, I found your wallet in front of a supermarket. Meet me at Apple Junction. Yes, I'll be waiting for you.
Now we find out. Two of us.
Thank you very much, officer. You know, it's surprising that men like you still exist in the police force.
Yes, so...
Oh, yes.
This is just a token of my appreciation.
Oh, no, you don't need to do this. We're only doing our job.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
You're welcome.
Now I know police is really my friend.
Yes.
Friend. Hey. Okay, which came up with this one? I don't understand.
You know your problem. You are greedy. I'm a policeman who is doing his job. All forms of corruption in the force, not in my country.
Corruption not in my country.
Welcome back. While the argument whether or not government should retain or remove petrol subsidy persists, one of the nation's deregulated products, diesel, have succumbed to market forces. According to analysis, the hike was buoyed by the recent increase in global oil prices and naira devaluation. With a population that relies heavily on diesel for production and transportation, a hike in price creates more pressure on the nation's struggling economy. Dr. Muda Yusuf, the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, joins me now on the program. As always, thank you so much for joining us. I'll begin by asking, what level of impact do you think this price hike will have on the economy?
Yes, the impact is quite significant. The impact is quite significant because of the state of the public power supply. So many businesses, especially those in the medium to small category of businesses, depend a great deal on the use of diesel. And that means that their cost of production will have gone up drastically. Their operating cost has gone up drastically. And given the fact that we have weak purchasing power as a result of the current economic conditions, it is not easy for these companies to pass on this additional energy cost to their consumers. Because right now, many businesses are expressing very serious consumer resistance. So that means that it is their margins that will take a hit as a result of this. So what we are likely to see as a consequence of this is a reduction in profit margins. We are likely to see a drop in sales because as prices go up, sales are likely to drop. Turnover is likely to drop. Industrial capacity utilization is also likely to be affected because we are talking about cost. Secondly, there's a major effect on the cost of transportation. Most of the trucks that move raw materials, that move finished goods across the country, most of these trucks, almost 80 to 90% of them, are powered by diesel. So this has implications for transportation costs. And when we talk about inflationary pressures, it has been identified long before now that the transportation cost is a major factor in the inflationary pressures that we have had in the recent months. So with the increase or the spike in the cost of diesel, we are likely to see an increase in transportation costs, which will further put pressure on the general price level. So from the point of view of the cost of logistics and transportation, and the cost of, and the point of view of the impact on production costs, as many businesses rely on generators powered by diesel to undertake their production, we are likely to see businesses being impacted negatively. And this, of course, is not good for sustainability of businesses. It's not good for the capacity of the businesses to be able to create jobs. So this is another challenge, another jeopardy that businesses are facing, in addition to the prevailing challenges that they have been facing. Challenges around the exchange rate depreciation, around forex illiquidity, around the port challenges, the Apapa gridlock, around issues of multiple taxations, around issues of several levies from regulatory institutions. And also we have issues of businesses, especially manufacturers, having to contend with very intense competition from products that are coming in from Asia and the like. So these are the challenges. It's quite tough for many businesses as a result.
Now, if PMS gets deregulated and petrol and diesel is sold at around the 280 naira per litre mark, will this not erode any gains the government has made in terms of economic development?
Well, in the short term, we will experience this kind of shocks. Shocks in terms of increased pressure on costs and a spike in energy prices. We are likely to see that. But in the medium to long term, the regulation of the downstream sector is a major component of economic reform that we need to undertake to ensure a sustainable economy. So that is what it is. In the short term, there will be some pains around this, and government has a responsibility to look at how we can mitigate the impact of these short-term shocks on the system arising from the deregulation of energy prices. But in the long to medium term, we are likely to see a much more positive impact in terms of increase in the production of energy as a result of increase in the level of investment, which is likely to be stimulated by the deregulation of the sector. We are likely to see an increase in supply, either from the electricity sector or from the fossil fuel sector. If you have more investments in that space, we are likely to see a lot more refining capacity from the private sector if we undertake the necessary reform in the form of deregulating the system. So in the short term, there will be some shocks, there will be some pains, but in the medium to long term, I think it will be very beneficial for the economy.
More often than not, the argument to deregulate is linked to whether or not government should spend more on local refineries. Do you think the amount spent and borrowed will help crash the price in these products in the long run?
Of course it would. Because right now we are dependent heavily on importation. And because of the volatility in the foreign exchange market, because of the depreciation in the exchange rate, the naira exchange rate, these prices keep galloping. But if you are producing locally, our exposure to these volatilities will be minimal. It will be reduced. And if you have the right policy environment, we are likely to see a much higher level of domestic capacity in the production of these fuels. What is happening now is that there is no capacity to produce domestically because the private sector investment have been effectively blocked because of the prevailing policy regime. So the only way to unlock private sector potential in terms of contributing or boosting production is to ensure that the prices or the sector is fully deregulated. So the outlook for production will be very bright if we unlock these potentials through the reforms that will emphasize will come within the framework of the petroleum industry bill. Because a major component of the bill is also the deregulation of the petroleum downstream sector. And just as you said, already we have a partial deregulation because diesel have been deregulated. Jet fuel, which is used by the aviation fuel, has been deregulated. Even kerosene, for all practical purposes, have also been deregulated. So it's only PMS that is left. And in order to unlock the private sector potentials to grow the sector, that reform must happen. Otherwise, we continue to grapple with the problem of overdependence on NNPC, grapple with the problem of all this, terrible amounts, huge amount that we spend on subsidy, grapple with the problem of corruption around the management of subsidy, and so on and so forth, which is not auguring well for the economy.
Now, many experts have argued that as long as Nigeria keeps depending on crude oil proceeds to run the economy, global events will determine its survival, just like we had in COVID-19. Where do we go from here?
The way forward is what the government and the people have been talking about over the years, is to diversify the economy. Economic diversification is the key. And for you to diversify the economy, you must put in place the right kind of reforms, part of which is what we have been discussing. You must put in place the right kind of policy regime and policy across all the key policy variables. Fiscal policy, monetary policy, tax policy, foreign exchange policy, institutional policy, investment policy, regulatory policy. All those policies must be right in order for us to be able to diversify the economy. But to diversify the economy, you need investment, you need investors. And if your policy regime, if your regulatory environment is not attractive enough, investment will not come and will not be able to diversify the economy. So we need to deal with the fundamental issues of having the right kind of policy regime, having the right kind of regulatory environment, building investors' confidence. Then we will see a much better progress as far as economic diversification is concerned.
Indeed, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the LCCI, thank you for your time. Ready to wrap on the program. Till next time, bye-bye.